Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Now, it's been just over a week since Hurricane Helene made landfall in North Florida and moved her way up the eastern seaboard, causing billions of dollars in damages. Heading into the weekend, authorities report nearly 200 people have been killed so far, and rescuers are still working trying to identify and find further missing people. Crops were damaged all along the route. Cattle producers, of course, throughout the Appalachian Valleys are still trying to locate their animals. As the storm moved north and brought rain over drought-impacted crops in the eastern Corn Belt, now those crops are starting to sprout in the fields. Farther south, poultry producers took a devastating hit across Georgia, and throughout the southeast, cotton harvest was imminent. Bowls were open, and damage is being calculated as we speak. Joining me now to discuss the issue is Dr. Gary Adams. He's the president and CEO of the National Cotton Council. And Dr. Adams, thanks for joining us this week.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Let's talk about the impact on cotton production here from Hurricane Helene. Why was the impact so profound this year?
Well, I think one, we have to keep in mind that it came pretty much straight up through Georgia, which is the second largest cotton producing state. In an average year, Georgia is going to produce about 2 million bales out of roughly a 15 million bale U.S. crop. So it came across a lot of acres. And then we also have to consider the timing of which the hurricane came across Georgia. A lot of those fields were just ready for harvest, which means the bowls were open, susceptible to damage. And that's what we've heard as we begin talking to our growers over the last week.
Gary, for those of us who are not in cotton production, unfamiliar with the crop in the field, can you describe what happens when those bowls open and why it's catastrophic?
Yeah, and really, as producers prepare for harvest, they do have an application they apply to the fields that will open up those bowls, and that's when you ride by and see the fluffy white cotton that looks so pretty from the road. Now, the problem is, and of course it's ready to be picked and goes through, and the picker pulls the fiber out of the bowls. The problem is when you get heavy wind and rainfall, then that's also going to pull the fiber out, and really it's going to leave it strung out or on the ground. And so that's why it's so devastating, is because the wind and rain can really do a lot of damage to the fiber and pull it out and leave it on the ground and leave nothing for the farmer left to pick.
So fill us in on how producers are handling the aftermath. Dr. Adams, are we going to start to see harvest move forward? Do they need time to recalibrate? What happens here for the producer?
And you're right. I mean, it's right now they're still assessing the damage. I mean, some of the impacts that we heard were, producers were still trying to remove trees so they could get it out of their driveway and really see what the damage is in their fields. Now, we've seen some pictures and we know that there's been some extensive damage, particularly in the eastern half of Georgia, and some producers are going to probably see fields that are basically a total loss. But they will get in and assess what can be harvested and what fields are not going to be harvested. And that's the process they're going through right now. And some of that is still too early to say, and it will depend on weather going forward. Do some of those plants stand back up that might have been pushed down by the wind? Is there still a crop there to harvest? So yes, that's where producers are right now, still assessing the damage.
How are producers economically faring as we go forward? I imagine most of the cotton produced in this country is covered by some form of crop insurance?
Well, we do have some crop insurance. Most of the time that coverage is going to be probably at a 70 or 75% level. Some might have a little bit higher level, which that really means that you've got a 20 or 25% deductible, if we want to think about it that way, that's not going to be compensated. And unfortunately for producers, particularly this year, and even before the hurricane, and for those producers not affected by the hurricane, market prices have weakened as we've gone through 2024. And we look at a futures market that today sits well below cost of production, and unfortunately some of the support levels in our in the current farm bill are below cost of production, as those costs have really risen over the last several years. So what we were already looking at in terms of a very difficult economic situation where producers were already, even with a normal crop, likely to lose money, now you're just going to exacerbate that for those producers that, on top of the economic losses, have to put in production loss as well.
Now, I understand it's not just the supply that's been impacted, it's also demand. Textile manufacturing facilities were shut down as well. Is that right?
That's correct, and we still have a textile manufacturing industry that's in Northeast Georgia. You're going to have it in Western North Carolina, some in South Carolina, and some in Eastern Tennessee. And particularly as we look at some of the rainfall totals that occurred, and a lot of that's going to be some of those areas that are a little bit more hilly, prone to flooding. And that's some of the issues that we're dealing with on the textile side is some facilities that are flooded, some that are still without power, and it has those shut down as well. So unfortunately, we've had impacts on production, we've had impacts kind of up the supply chain with buildings being damaged, and then as we look at the demand side in our U.S. textile manufacturers, some of those have been hit extremely hard by the heavy rainfall.
Dr. Adams, before we let you go, in addition to demand, we've also got the port strike. Is that going to have an impact on cotton prices, do you think?
I think the longer it goes, it can have a detrimental impact on prices, particularly if we cannot get the cotton exported. Eastern ports, Gulf ports are very important for cotton exports, particularly if you look at ports such as Savannah, Charleston, Norfolk, Houston, Galveston. All of those are key ports for cotton products to move out, not just the raw fiber exports, but also the yarn and fabric that our textile manufacturers produce.
Dr. Gary Adams, President and CEO of the National Cotton Council, thank you so much for joining us this week.